equal spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words are now, it's made with good intentions.
Kia ora, New Zealand, and welcome to One of 200, a podcast about My Little Pony Friendship is Magic and the Rise of American Fascism, where I take my friend through the Dragon Ball comic from start to finish. I'm here replacing Kyle. He's been away, he's very sick, and of course you have to deal with me. So get ready to have Daddy Hosk tell you what to think and how to feel. I'm here with my co-host who has Duncan garnered a lot of praise for his South African impressions, but today he's just going to be talking to us about education. How you doing, Dash?
I almost instinctively went into the South African accent. I'm good. I'm good.
Mitch, keep all of this.
Yeah, you were calling to the South African inside of me.
That's all right. Well, we are actually taking over One of 200. Daddy's away, the mice will play. So we're going to be having some fun here today. But we are going to be going through current events topics. I was going to say current affairs. We are going through current events topics today. We have a few that are lined up for you. I think we're doing mostly domestic today, and we'll see where we get to with that. So how are you doing here this fine day in Kirikiriroa?
The things are mostly all good. Domestic affairs, well, we won't get into those, but...
You and me both, buddy. Yes, sorry, I am Simone, by the way, if you didn't know.
And I am Pmax / education correspondent.
Local, specifically Waikato local education correspondent.
Yeah,
where things are really normal and everything's good.
Sorry.
That's right. Let's dox a listener? No, dox a co-host.
We can dox listeners. Kyle's not here.
You know what? While Kyle's not here, we can just tell them Kyle's address. I'm kidding, Mitch. I'm kidding. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we have a few different things that are happening today because, of course, we have a national government and everything is happening every day, all of the time. Things also happen with the Labour government, but it tends to be more of a holding pattern, is our thesis. So the first one that I wanted to get into is these massive sweeping changes to NCEA. And I want to pretend like I don't know anything about this, mostly because I don't understand it because I'm not a teacher. But from your perspective, Dash, from the inside, how do we feel about what is going on? And firstly, what is going on?
Okay, so glad that you've taken the Erica Stanford, I don't understand why excellence is better than achieved approach to understanding NCEA.
It's an E. It must be bad.
Yeah. Basically, the government has announced that they are changing from the NCEA structure for assessment, and that they're going to be introducing a brand new one that's out of 100 E to A, more in line with quote unquote international standards. Interestingly enough, not really in line with international standards, maybe more in line with like Anglophonic international standards, but honestly, I don't even really know enough. I have an Erica Stanford level of understanding about overseas education regimes because I've been learning our one for the past, 8 years. So, kind of doesn't make sense for me to learn what people overseas have been doing, but it seems like, the ministry official position is that I should have been doing the opposite of that and, learning how they teach people overseas, so I can apply it here. Now, there's several layers of confusion to this, which make breaking it all down a bit simpler. But basically, what is being proposed to be changed is the way that we assess our students, and the biggest changes are getting rid of NCEA Level 1, which was sort of I guess it was more of a foundational training wheels level of assessment. No one was really expected to leave high school with just NCEA Level 1. In an ideal society, but obviously a lot of our students are leaving with just NCEA Level 1. So it made a sort of helpful stepping stone. I don't know if stepping stone's the right word, but a helpful thing for kids to have as I have finished my vision of high school with NCEA Level 1. And you can see this across the socioeconomic statistics. Lots of lower areas with more socioeconomic challenges will have more students graduating with just NCEA Level 1 or no NCEA at all. whereas the higher socioeconomic, whatever, being very specific here at 9:50 a.m. Area schools will often just drop NCEA level 1, or will even like offer things like IB and Cambridge.
Yeah, I started off with a class of, I want to say about 400, and by year 13 it was maybe 150.
That's good. I've worked in schools where there is a very depressing number of people left at the end. And I think key to this debate, and something that should really be centred, hasn't really been centred by a lot of the correspondents on the issue, is the issue with New Zealand education is not one of assessment regime. It's not one of curriculum. Our education issue, our problem, the thing that is like pulling those stats back that everyone wants to be high, is an equity and social inequality issue. We have an education system that overwhelmingly caters to Pākehā students, and we also have an education system that overwhelmingly greatly serves people who are comfortable in their lifestyles, and one that cannot provide enough for those who are struggling, which the number of people who are struggling grows day by day by day by day. And the thing that's extremely frustrating about this is the government knows this, because their besties, the New Zealand Initiative, have highlighted this fact. They've highlighted that in their own research, they've highlighted that when you control for all other factors, the income of the family household is the number one determinant on how successful a student is going to be. So if the most effective, widespread, non-targeted way to improve education in New Zealand is to make sure that people have stable homes, stable livelihoods, and a lot of this other stuff is sort of tinkering by the wayside. So getting back into
Absolutely right.
Getting back into the tinkering by the wayside. So they're changing this assessment regime. There's several huge issues with this. First of which is the plan to make all marking external. Marking takes a lot of work, and the problem with external marking is students don't get comprehensive feedback on their assessments, because, markers usually, I don't know what the precise numbers are, but they've got something like less than 10 minutes per paper to mark. I think this is probably anecdotal, but it's like 7 minutes per paper. Otherwise, you're just literally not going to get through them in time for those marks to get entered into the system. Someone will know the exact number, but you do not have a lot of time to mark, and you're not putting in huge amounts of feedback because you just simply don't have the time, and that feedback is not tailored to that particular student. Because you're external, you've got no idea about the context that student is learning in. So it's like, okay, I'm like, yeah, you did really terribly at this, you didn't pick up on this, you didn't pick up on this. That student's cultural background, they might not have had any idea about those particular elements. And so you've got to think about, like, when you're giving feedback to a student, you know what areas they can improve in more effectively, you know how to structure that feedback in a way that is constructive. When you're just sort of scribbling down feedback on a random student numbers paper, yeah, you're gonna give them like boilerplate, here's the thing. And the troubling thing about this as well is Erica Stanford has openly said that the way they're going to solve this marking problem, because if you're going to make all the marking external, then that's going to be a huge increase in workload for NZQA, is to just have AI do the marking. AI, it's sort of like multiplying that boilerplate problem, because now not only is it not a person giving that feedback, like an educator giving that feedback, it's just a language model drawing from like the agglomerated feedback of 1 million students, and spitting out something extremely generic. I've worked with AI tools in schools. There's an AI writing tool. You basically write a paragraph and then it will give you feedback on how to improve that paragraph. The problem with it is it doesn't tell you how to improve your writing. It tells you how to write in a specific way better, which is not ideal. If we want a generation
Business emails.
yeah, if we want a generation of students that have the exact same writing style and no sort of ability to creatively express themselves, then I guess that'll work, but it's not ideal. And it's also it's solving a problem that doesn't exist. Like, the only problem it's solving is the problem of cost. It's not like we already have people who are willing to be paid to mark and give feedback. Just pay those people more instead of giving hundreds of millions of dollars to AI tech bros to deliver a much worse product. So that's one of the problems, is the external marking. The other problem is we still don't have the new curriculum, and like, curriculum is a lot more complex than people seem to think. People seem to think that, like, the government says teach this and then all the teachers just teach whatever the government says. We have our New Zealand curriculum, which is all the core skills, competencies. I'm not going to say the specific things because it does bore me, but sort of like a profile of what a learner should know for each subject. So English curriculum, it's sort of like unpacking texts, and then there's different levels to unpacking the text. And it's sort of, if you are being taught English in New Zealand, you should be able to perform this level of unpacking a text at this year level. Although the levels don't line up one-to-one with years. Our NCEA assessments are keyed in to those competencies. So you might have unfamiliar text, which is a student's ability to interpret a text that they've just sort of been given blind. Or there's like close viewing, which is a student's ability to break down a movie, which is all lined up with the English curriculum. We've had NCEA for a very long time now, and those assessments have been tried and tested. They are internally moderated, so every single assessment is moderated by another teacher in the school. They're also, there's several standards each year that are chosen to be externally moderated, so schools have to send copies of their marked assessments to other schools to be sort of cross-referenced and checked against the standard. So there's a rigorous process to make sure that all of these achievement standards are robust and serving the purpose. In addition to the national curriculum, each school has its own individual curriculum. And so this is sort of like the subjects that they teach and how they structure those subjects and how they deliver the national curriculum. Because you can't teach the same way in every single school, because every single school has been built differently. We still have schools that are like 1950s, 1960s vintage.
Some of them haven't been built. Some of them are just quote-unquote temporary classrooms that have stayed around for 15 years.
Yeah. So there's
like trailer parks. We have trailer park schools. Let's say it.
Yeah, there's all these different spaces, all these different places. You have to think about the context, the school. So, for example, Wellington schools, as part of their social studies curriculum, will usually include a trip to Parliament. That's not so feasible for schools outside of the capital. Schools close to Mount Ruapehu will probably have road trips to go visit the mountain, have a look at the Crater Lake or whatever. Schools close to the beach will often include some kind of like rock pools observing, because these are all really rich learning experiences. And you've got to make use of those like local geographic blah 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 blahs. Now the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum was already a fairly big change, and some schools are still working on incorporating that curriculum. And that curriculum was aligned with the current New Zealand curriculum, but sort of added on under the new format that they were working towards. It's all quite complicated because it's a curriculum that's been under development. There was also the digital technologies curriculum, which got redeployed recently, which is supposed to cover all subjects, but not all schools are able to teach digital technology across all subjects because not all schools have digital technology in every single classroom. There was also like not enough PLD given. So teachers like literally weren't given the tools to teach the digital technology curriculum, because you've got like an 80-year-old English teacher who hasn't used a computer in her whole life. Suddenly she's expected to like teach kids how to navigate a web browser or something like that as a part of English. It's all very fun.
It's not only that, is it? I mean, you've got that spectrum, right? Like, you do have these older teachers, and I think our teachers skew older because they burn out when they're younger. Correct me wrong. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of teachers burn out within 5 years.
3.
3 years. Okay, that's got worse since I heard about that.
3-year test, baby.
Yeah, so there are also teachers, and I experienced this when I was a teenager and a little more savvy than my teachers, is that there will be young ones who are very into technology, but very uncritically. They're kind of fans of technology and they're excited to try to integrate almost anything. No conception of how this might affect the student's literacy, their ability to imbibe and retain information, any kind of spaced repetition. It's literally just, look, it's exciting that iPads exist. Let's try to put this into a classroom with no consequence or no thought about how this might actually affect different learning styles or child psychology. And I found that a bit of, I suppose, a struggle, because I was always very critical about reading about the effects of all of this. And I even into university, and this is just a personal thing, like I would handwrite everything, so that I'd force myself to synthesize everything. And that's not to say you can't use technology, but I think that there is the spectrum. You do have the 80-year-old teacher, and you also have these younger teachers, maybe in their 30s, who are very excited about whatever the newfangled thing is. And that might be a quote-unquote AI now, right?
Yeah, AI is definitely a hot topic in education because there are legitimate pedagogical opportunities with regards to AI. The problem is there's lots of educators who are seeing the uses for AI in a classroom supporting a teacher, and then there are institutions looking at AI as replacements for teachers, because that's sort of the golden goose of education, is turning it from what it is now, sort of, I guess, a flawed system for ensuring that the next generations develop knowledge and critical thinking and a love for the world and all that kind of thing, and turning it into daycare with computers that make sure the consumers know enough to buy things and pull the lever at work or whatever future employment looks like. But going back to the sort of the local curriculum thing, so each school needs to develop its own curriculum, and that curriculum has to include assessment opportunities, and it also has to be aligned with the national curriculum. And that's where the current announcement is legitimately fucking insane, because we don't have the refreshed curriculum yet. I don't think the refreshed curriculum is in a state to be delivered, because every single time they've attempted to push it forward or bring it out, a subject association has basically looked at it, screamed in horror, and the Ministry of Education has been like, okay, we're going to consult on this more. We saw some stuff about this with the English curriculum last year, where they basically just gave it to a bunch of New Zealand initiative hacks, and they were like, cool, yeah, the kids will learn, I don't know, fucking Shakespeare from year 9 to 13, and you don't need to learn about New Zealand.
We're going to make sure it's not woke.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, trust me, I would make Shakespeare so woke. I'm God's strongest woke
New Zealand
soldier.
history is such a contested area as well, I think.
Yeah.
You touched on that a little bit earlier, but this has been a big thing with this government, is an attempt to try to undo the minimal gains that came under Labour, which were pushed by the History Teachers Association, isn't that right? This came partly from below.
Well, it came from students. The Aotearoa New Zealand's History's curriculum was implemented as a result of a student petition. A couple of lovely girls, I believe, went through high school without learning any New Zealand history. And so they took a petition to Parliament being like, teach our fucking history, nerds. The biggest attacks on history under this government, there's been lots of like nibbling at the edges around like the focus on teaching New Zealand history. Sort of, I haven't seen anything concrete come through yet. I know it's in the curriculum refresh, but I haven't seen anything specific. The biggest attack has actually been on the Department of Heritage, Ministry of Heritage. They've defunded all the historians who make history material for New Zealand students. I think there's one left. There were 26 or something. But they're the ones who maintain websites like Tiara and the New Zealand Biography website. I think perhaps Digital NZ, although that might be
Is that Dictionary of New Zealand Biography?
Dictionary of New Zealand Biography, and then there's also NZ or whatever. All fantastic websites, all resources that I've used in my classes frequently. And yeah, they're just being axed because we quote unquote don't have the money for it. But it's very clearly sort of like an attempt to shape the narrative. But going back to that local curriculum assessment sort of matrix, we don't have a new curriculum yet, and they are wanting to implement assessment for that curriculum starting next year. Initially they were planning to start next year, but now it's just going to be year 9s, I think, or perhaps year 10s as well.
Dash?
Pardon?
How hard could it be, Dash?
Well,
less than a year.
The problem is at high school you are educating the students to prepare them for the assessments level 1, 2, 3. Currently under NCEA. I guess it's going to be like the certificate of I can read and do numbers, and then the certificate of like I passed high school, and then the advanced certificate of I passed high school, or whatever the fuck they're calling it.
For school for kids who can read good and want to learn to do other stuff good too.
But the thing is, like, and it's like in an ideal world, we would be educating children to develop their understanding, love for the world, turning them into lifelong learners, which is what like the top performing countries educationally is. They focus on developing the student as a learner, as a person, as a citizen, instead of teaching to assessment. We are not resourced or trained enough to pull that off on a national scale. There are schools that operate in this fashion, but not all schools can operate like that, purely because of the financial constraints on those schools, the lack of trained teachers, and the fact that a lot of these students are unable to go to school because they're working or they're looking after family, or they're just so disengaged with the education system that has shown itself many times to like not give a fuck about them. So anyway, we have to teach to the assessment. It's depressing, but it's also a factor of tomorrow's schools, where schools are in competition with each other, and achievement statistics are what people look to when they're choosing if they've got choice of what school to send their student to, they're going to look at the achievement statistics, which are like posted publicly.
School choice, quote unquote.
Yeah, school choice, which ultimately means, you're teaching to the assessment because your school's funding depends on you getting more credits than that school down the road.
Yeah, the notion of a national curriculum and a national kind of assessment, but having schools within that, which are all funded by the same government, right, competing with each other, is a kind of self-cannibalizing logic that doesn't make any sense.
But that's...
Well, on the level of if you wanted to educate people, it doesn't make sense. But it does a very good job at racially segregating, at segregating economically.
Yes. Which I think was I don't think it was the aim when it was implemented. I think the aim when it was implemented was there was this, like...
It was just a happy byproduct.
The aim when it was implemented was people were like, oh, competition makes everything better, and not really sort of thinking through logically what the actual outcomes would be. But then when the outcome became, the rich white kids are getting a way better education than those poor brown kids now, no one really wanted to change that. Because if you make a more equal schooling system, then like little Timmy isn't going to automatically just sort of like cruise to an average grade without having to put in as much effort. Yeah, it sucks. Anyway.
And I think there's this kind of, I don't know, I just wanted to pull the lens back a little bit because we're talking about the NCEA matters, and also about, I think the most alarming thing is that AI marking implementation, because you have this idea that teachers, like you say, you're marking to an external standard that you sort of understand, but you don't really know who the marker is going to be. In some ways, when you prepare them for being marked by a human marker, you're sort of releasing your students out into the world when they do their external examinations at the end of the year and saying, like, I hope that I've given you all of the tools this year so that you can study on your own to then, proceed to succeed at that exam, right? Mm-hmm. But if the idea is that you're teaching to an AI, not even necessarily knowing what training data it's trained on, which hopefully not just business emails and AO3 fanfic or something like that. Realistically, there's a kind of perverse outcome where not only is teaching a means to an end rather than an end in itself, which is like the flowering of the human being as, you know, both an individual subject and, you know, collectively together with other people within their cohort. You're also being used not only towards the means to an end, but the end itself is an abstracted, inhuman, quote-unquote AI. There's something horrifying about that philosophically, I think. You're tap dancing to please the machine.
Yeah, I guess maybe this is a signal from our AI overlords, just sort of hinting towards the future, I guess. No, it's fucking depressing, and I really do think... I'm disappointed in the electoral left for not pushing back enough on these proposed changes, because we really do just need to take a big step back and be like, well, what do we actually want from our education system? Because the future of the education system that's being painted, National and the Coalition at the moment, is a really fucking depressing one. It's one where those with wealth get a well-rounded world-class education, and those without get put into the factory and come out as like either failures who go, I guess, straight into a youth boot camp or something, or as sort of like a drone ready to be placed into some form of miserable employment. Just the last thing, just wrapping up where I was going on the assessment side of things. So with the year 9s who are coming in, ideally they should be getting prepared for that higher level assessment, for that higher level curriculum. We are going to have the year 9 curriculum. We're not going to have any of the assessment. We're not going to have any of the higher level curriculum, which won't start to get phased in until 2027, 2028. And even then, I don't even know how deep the consultation with teachers is going to be. So essentially, it's going to be teaching blind. And so we could be preparing students for assessments that aren't going to happen. We could be teaching them certain... like in the history thing, we could be teaching them that like the Springbok tour was a good thing. It was good that New Zealanders opposed it, and then who knows, maybe the actual assessment that comes through will be explain why the Springbok tour is a blight on New Zealand's history. And
no, actually, we don't know what happened with the Springbok tour because this is the John Key Memorial curriculum where he can't remember what he was.
Yeah. The most noble thing to have done during the Springbok tour is not remember it.
Sit on your couch with your thumb up your fucking ass.
Yeah. But yeah, the prognosis is basically get in the plane, fly it blind, turn off the radar. If you see the shape of a mountain, just like go full speed, I guess.
If you're in a whiteout in Antarctica, just keep going.
Yeah.
Anyway, the colonial history of this country, I think, is something that is really not taught. I was in year 13. I went on a history trip, and we just like visited redoubts in the Taranaki region, so you could see like the First and Second Taranaki War, right? And those scars are still on the land, and this is something that people drive by all the time. There are no plaques commemorating a lot of them. There's nothing marking it like a lot of other countries have. Like, you know, in America, Gettysburg Address, like they got that shit. Like they've got it all marked out. They've got tour guides for a lot of this stuff. In New Zealand, absolutely fucking not. This is... you know, the erasure is necessary for the continued implementation of a neo-colonial state. And I think this is why there is this grand forgetting. There is, and people use this term a lot, but there is something really Orwellian about memory holding a lot of New Zealand history. And I think that this attempt to subvert everything that could be educational for a child by submitting it to, these mechanical, abstracted ends, right? And students just means toward pleasing the AI, as well as doing a total wholesale renovation of NCEA, essentially as boomer bait, as boomer slop, right? Because this is just something where people are like, in my day, we did school C and then sixth form and then seventh form was optional because you learned everything that you wanted to learn before then. Like that kind of thing, right? You know,
100%.
It serves a dual purpose. It is boomer slop, it's boomer bait, but at the same time as attempting to appeal towards those sorts of voters and that intentional ignorance, there is a lot of Seymour in this. And I think, you know, like we said, Erica Stanford doesn't understand a lot. She's not called Erica Harvard. But Seymour's particular approach is really shot through with this. It's not just this feeling of the whole school choice thing. It's not just the actual funding of charter schools and so on and so forth, and the privileging of them. There's also the way that this entire education system is gathered around the idea of, assessment, of exams, of not students in themselves, and the segregation, which means the only people who are getting a good education to become lifelong learners are people in the higher socioeconomic bands. This is an intentional form of segregation. And I think that dovetails really well with another story that's a much smaller story that we've had recently, which is the Education Ministry just withdrawing from reprinting a children's school book because it had too many kupu Māori in it. And the book is called, and I kid you not, At the Marae. Of course it's going to have kupu Māori.
Okay, so that's one of its 3 kupu Māori, used out the gate in the title. So you can only have 3.
Yeah. You can
It's
only
the
have
rule
three.
of 3s.
You want to know how many? This book in Reo Māori? No, it was not. Which also, not a problem with that, because we should be teaching that concurrently with English, right? We should have a bilingual society at minimum. The issue is not necessarily that, right? It's the fact that it only has 6 of them.
Yeah.
And they're all really
7,
common
because
words.
there's a Māori name in there as well, and that counts.
I'm so sorry.
They blew the budget. We're going to run out, all these liberals complaining about how Māori is, under threat, and here they are wanting to blow 7 of them in one book. We're going to ration them out.
I think, the Māori Principals Association has submitted, I think done quite a good interview with Radio New Zealand.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think was really touched upon is that the notion of this is not just that these students have what they describe as lived experience with this, right? It's that it is developmentally appropriate for them, and this actually has a really good approach to students learning phonics, because Māori orthography is a lot more regular than English, and it assists students in reading a book if there's something kind of easier than the kind of nonsense that we have with English spelling. So if you have a few kupu Māori that are familiar, where they instantly know them, like kai or karakia, right? Then that's the sort of thing which really assists them and can create, because it is, it makes sense to them, or it's the world that they live in, that it kind of grabs them. You can create this interest in reading. There's no reason for this. And I think the Māori Principals Association has done a really good job. I think it's Te Akatea. I might be wrong about that.
No idea.
Yeah, Te Akatea. They did quite a good job of laying out that this is, and sort of unabashedly and unalloyed saying, this is a white supremacist attack on education, because it is. And I think that dovetails really well with the NCEA matters, that this is the intention of kind of whiteifying the school, of creating essentially a kind of recapitulation, if you will, of the Education Ordinance Act of 1847, or the Native Schools Act.
Yeah, it's certainly a return to tradition in that sense.
Or the Suppression Act, which, was a major way of destroying Reo Māori in this country. And I think, these things all together, it's bad, folks, just to pull a Kyleism out right at this late hour.
It's also chiming in. It's rhyming with the fears around the use of Reo Māori in schools, where it's
on your passport as well.
Yeah,
everything.
Well, hey, at least they put
it's a total full spectrum attack.
At least they put the Queen's English on top.
Yeah, the Queen's English. New Zealand.
What we should have done is we should have changed it into New Zealand, actually put the phonetic.
It should just be IPA.
Something like that. But it dovetails in with this idea that they shouldn't be learning Māori at schools. They should be learning their 1, 2s, and 3s and how to read proper. But you can do both.
Well, the classic other Pākehā pronunciation, which is Māori.
Yeah. But it's just you can do both. It's you can teach maths with tahi rua toru wha, and children understand that. I don't know how people who are in their 40s and 50s don't, but it's sort of you can still teach the same thing. You can just sprinkle a bit of te reo in there. It's ideally we would be in a bilingual society, but we literally do not have enough reo speakers to achieve that goal. And the way we get towards that is by elevating the mana of reo Māori across the curriculum. And
And
were making moves towards that. We have been making moves towards that. There has been a greater embracing of tikanga Māori, reo Māori, matauranga Māori in education spaces. And I mean, not to draw the lens back too wide, I think it's scaring the living fuck out of the electoral right.
I thought you were going to say it's scaring the hose, and I was like, this is the wrong podcast, Ash.
But I think it is scaring the electoral right because they know there's no place for them in a world where there is like more acceptance of reo Māori, where more people are aware of New Zealand's history and New Zealand's native language and native practices.
There's a huge hypocrisy about it because the idea that's usually put forward is, Māori is a very simple language. I mean, firstly, false. But secondly, this idea that, English has this great canon, it's got this corpus of literature. And the thing is, we don't respect that in this country. This country is full of cultural and artistic illiterates. We don't respect the arts. We don't fund it. You can't read. I know you can't read. Name me your favorite Dostoevsky book. Shut the fuck up.
Hey, they read Harry Potter.
Genuinely... Yeah, these people, and I guarantee you, all of these, again, Parnell Yummy Mummies, are reading, the latest Marion Keyes, or probably worse, some, Outlander, or some kind of, essentially, young adult for actual adults, sex slop, vaguely dressed up romance, and they call that literature. And the thing is, it's fine to read that, it's great entertainment, but this is like watching Love Island and being like, I'm a cinephile. What?
Yeah.
So in many cases, I think there's a huge hypocrisy about it. But not only that, monolinguals don't understand. You know nothing about your own language until you learn a second one. Mm-hmm. If you want these students to get better at English and to really understand it as a language and to really grapple and grasp with all of the concepts that are just ingrained with them since they were born, because they've imbibed this osmotically, then you have to teach a second language. And this is the language of this country. It's the indigenous language, right?
Well, it's also there's this belief that is wow, it's just an insane amount of work to learn another language. This is it's crazy that our government is being we need to do this A to E thing because it's what countries overseas do. Bilingualism is the international norm. We're an outlier because we have a monolingual education system. If you want to fix something about an education system to bring it more in line with overseas, make us bilingual.
And it's, of course, a lot easier to learn more languages once you've learned how to consciously learn one, right, as a second language.
Yeah.
So I think there's something really telling about all of it. And the pulling of this specific book at the marae is an indication of something much broader which is happening, this attack. And part of that, I think, is because we're seeing a kind of second Māori renaissance at this time, right? That a lot of the greatest political enemies of capitalism entering its death throes as global warming continues, as fascism rises to try to create a kind of release valve for this, is Māori in this country. It's the indigenous people, right? Te Ao Māori is one of the most effective political resistances that exists and has existed. And people who are actual tangata whenua in this country far outstrip, generally speaking, Pākehā in terms of their ability to marshal organisation, of activism, and all of these spheres of dismantling and pushing back against repression. And people again, just to pick the face of this kind of ghoulish movement, Seymour, of the entire National Party, and of the people who they actually work for, the kind of, controllers of capital and the managers and the ruling class, right, of this country and globally as well. They're terrified because that's what represents a huge break with it, that you have to break the back of the settler colony to move towards any form of justice in this country. And any crack in that, including, the allowance of Māori language or otherwise, is a challenge to that. And I think it was rightly recognized as so in the 19th century. And they're just starting to get kind of an understanding since the 1970s of that back. There is this kind of resurgence. At the same time as we're seeing a second Māori renaissance, we are also seeing, politically, artistically, and otherwise, we're also seeing this repression rise in response to it. And I think people have it backwards. We talk about the rise of fascism, and this does come from this deterioration of capitalism, as it fails to meet any of the challenges that threaten the existence of the human species and the survival of societies on this planet. But it's also a response. There's a reason they're called reactionaries. We saw this great kind of hope with, I suppose, what gets sort of pejoratively termed the woke era. But, pre the onset of the pandemic, I think people forget a little bit that we did have, these student strikes for climate, that we were seeing a lot of movement in the Indigenous space as well, politically and artistically. As I say, this is kind of full spectrum across the board, and this was becoming normalized to the extent that the judges of this country, the kind of classically very restrained reflectors of culture in this country, have said, tikanga is an essential part of New Zealand's law, of its rather unique character, and this is one source of law, the same way that common law is, the same way that statutes are. And it's because of that upsurge that we've seen a huge backlash. And I think that we can't underestimate that indicates how flimsy the House of Cards is. They are terrified.
Yeah, well, I think they've recognised that they're the last generation that's going to sort of stand for the status quo. And I think you can see that in the desperation of coalition legislature, where they're trying to put through as many long-lasting, entrenched, well, not legally entrenched, but entrenched sort of policies and decisions and movements and infrastructure projects and changing the way the government functions and works and interacts with people, to try and poison the well and drag out the tail of this as long as possible. Because there's just not enough of them left. And it's sure, their ghoulish children are going to continue in their stead, but there's not enough of them. There's not enough people at the top. There's not the sort of well-off middle class that's formed the basis of National's electoral strength. And also, ironically, the group that Labour seems most interested in getting to vote for them. There's a half-life on them. They're not going to be around forever. And unfortunately, the way our economy is structured, there's not going to be another crop. There's not going to be another bunch of them. The money's all gone. It's just housing Ponzi left.
We have something which is unrelated, but I think is a little bit related, tangentially, let's say, which is that police are investigating new complaints of sexual assault and otherwise sexual misconduct against the former ACT Party president, Tim Jago. He must not be named, to pull from the Turf Queen for a second. That's not surprising and not shocking. A lot of people say that when, there's some kind of new outrageous thing dropped by the government, that this is some kind of distraction from ACT scandals. But I don't really want to think about it that way. I don't really want to talk about the horse race of it or of the kind of media shaping of it. I think what's important here to think about is that we often frame things like Tim Jago's abuse, particularly of young people, right, as in terms that are quite favourable to Nazis, and that we condemn paraphilia itself. And I said this with Philip when I was on, but not to say that that is not a component of it, because it absolutely is a driving component of it. But it's that people who are in this protected class of persons, they are able to get away with this exercise of power, and there is an abuse and assault portion of it which is exactly about that, right? Person in a position of authority, and that's part of what they're doing in it. And who gets protected and who doesn't get reported on is a big part of that. And who gets name suppression is a big part of that as well. So there are these broader things at play here, right? And there's also the sense in which if you are part of this protected class of persons, or you have a proximity to power, you have a tendency to not respect the autonomy of other people, that you don't have an understanding of empathy, and also in particular that the conception of children in the model of the nuclear family is as property. And all of these things, I think, have these links to even the way that we approach our education system as well. you know, they're just these subjects that are essentially under the property of their parents. And we see this as well in pushing back against, you know, trans rights, that, parents' rights, you know, like parents have to be able to have a veto on their child actually being able to have some kind of bodily autonomy or the ability to express themselves, you know, and put them in danger. This is a common right-wing thing, and we would say, well, how does that make sense? They call, you know, queer people groomers, etc., and yet at the same time, they're hypocrites because they have Tim Jago and they have all of these other people. But that's part of the same ideology. It's not hypocritical to them. They have total control over children as property to do with as they will.
Yeah, there's a really depressing through line with a lot of the coalitions legislating and movements this term, which have been like actively targeted at disempowering children. So, you know, there's all this stuff, attacks on education. There's the change to the free fees. So instead of for the first year fees 3, it's the third year fees 3. There's the change to youth unemployment, where it's a lot harder for them to claim unemployment. So it's a lot harder for young people who might be in touchy home lives to sort of become independent. There's all the economic changes which have made it a lot harder for young people to get jobs. It's kind of hard to not chart through this all, not observe this all and think that there's like, maybe it's going a bit too far to say that there's like an intentional, like, not pedophilic, but an intentional like abuse of young people angle to it, and more they've done the calculation and they're like, okay, there's a lot of young people are going to get taken advantage of. We're okay with that. That's an acceptable casualty to the legislation that we're putting in.
Indeed, and I think there's also, and people talk a lot about parapolitics and also, you know, clandestine sort of clubs that a lot of people in the ruling class, you know, participate in that. And I don't want to get into that here. I mean, there are other podcasts that delve into all that sort of thing. But, you know, there are all these components of class bonding between people who would normally, you know, be at each other's throats over this sort of stuff. I mean, Epstein's back in the news, and we sort of think about the massive human trafficking operation there and its links to intelligence agencies and so on and so forth. And I think here, well, jeepers, getting that FBI office and essentially what's likely going to be a CIA front here as well, right? I think it's worth understanding that these are all part of the same kind of systems of power. And it can be hard to see those links because of the misinformation and misunderstandings that we have that get promoted, these kind of narratives about what this sort of thing is. People say, oh, I can't believe this was a bad apple who was the head of the surf club who is doing this to children, with no understanding, really, that there isn't some kind of ontological quality to either that person or persons who are in that position. You know, we talk about child abuse within the Catholic Church, and people say, oh, it's because priests are all like secretly gay diddlers who become priests so that they can access children. It's like, okay, perhaps there's a component of that. However, what we're talking about in particular is an institution which will protect them, and they have total power and secrecy and control over these children, right? And the trust of a community. And there is a kind of blinding through the religiosity, which means that people tend to turn a blind eye when they think that, you know, a person of standing who has prestige in their community is not going to do something. And that's all these things lining up, these systems of power which operate. And I don't want to depersonalize it because, again, I don't think that these people who are the victims of Tim Jago are just tools for us to discuss politics in the world and in this country. And I have an immense amount of empathy for them, and I am really sorry that it took them this long to come forward because they just couldn't come out earlier. And it's disgusting that they couldn't. And knowing that you have people who are high up in the police, right, who themselves have been convicted of possessing child sexual assault material and other materials that indicate similar kinds of disdain towards the most vulnerable people in our society, and getting off at that fact. I think it's worth considering that they actually made a really rational calculation. And I don't want to hear anybody talking about why didn't these people come forward. They're just, you know, trying to get attention now, or they're trying to act through this, etc., etc., etc. You know, these kinds of cynical narratives about it. because it takes an immense bravery to come forward, and I hope that if there are any more people that they come forward as well, frankly. And I hope that they can get some kind of justice or some kind of succor out of this. Anyway, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrapped up?
Not really. It's been a long week.
RNZ continues to have terrible coverage on Gaza. I think that is worth leaving to Kyle and the others in the gang to cover in probably most of an actual whole episode.
Yeah.
I think this is the NCEA episode.
Yeah, I think the RNZ being bad on Gaza isn't so much a news as olds.
Fork, fun, and kitchen, But in particular, the plans to take over Gaza and turn it into, I don't know, a Trump resort or something like that.
I'm sure it's all above board.
This kind of total obliteration, right, of Palestinian life in the Strip. So, was there anything that you wanted to leave us with in respect of education, hopeful or otherwise?
The biggest thing I would have to say in regards to education is there's going to be striking this year. There's going to be a lot of movement to try and get some decent conditions for teachers, and that's the ground floor for improving our education system, is like actually having the people to do the improving. And I think that's the wedge that the government intends to use to break education, because if they can make teaching an unattractive enough role so that they don't have New Zealand born, New Zealand educated people wanting to teach it, and instead it's mostly people who are either desperate to accept like miserable conditions or people from overseas. I think that works really well. That cleaves to the coalition's goals of having an education system that is just even more segregated than the one we have now, which shouldn't really be possible. It's already like pretty segregated. They should be happy with the level of segregation they have. But one where you either pay for a good education or you're sending your kid to the child minding mines. Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to just that thin end of the wedge. The teachers are the ones who are going to fight hardest for a better education, and for all. And the unions are how that fight is usually focalized. It would be nice to see more support from political parties and non-political party actors. But yeah, these strikes are going to be big. And so I guess like my homework for listeners is just to like consciously have those conversations, bring it up around the water cooler, the strikes and so forth, and just make it really clear that having any opinion that isn't teachers should be paid much more and have much better conditions so that they can pass on far better education to students. Like having any other opinion other than that is detestable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's move on to plugs. We're gonna wrap this up. I didn't have particularly any closing thoughts. I think we've acquitted ourselves okay for the cats are away sort of day. So where can the people find you, Dash, and where in particular can the DM sliders find you?
So I am mostly active at Pedagogy Maxima on X and
.com, the everything app. Everything happens.
I also have a Blue Sky, but I really don't like going on Blue Sky, so sorry.
Nobody does.
DMs are open, ladies. You can cut that if you want, Mitch.
Also, we have Mitch, keep that. We can.
Mitch has had to cut like 57 things this episode.
That's not true. That is not true. Mitch, don't cut.
Listener, look at the runtime for this episode. I'm reading about 2 hours. So that should give you an indication of how much has been cut.
Shut up. We have a podcast that's coming out soon called The Department of Fumbles. And if you would like to be mentioned in that... including Jenny from this podcast. It's very good. It's totally unrelated. It's not politics related at all. It's about, the aspirations of government, really. The Ministry of Romantic Relations. So look forward to that. If you want to find out when that's coming out, follow at 1-800-TALK-TO-GIRLS with TO instead of the digit 2, the numeral 2. 1-800-TALK-TO-GIRLS.
I think it's also Department of Fumbles on Bluesky.
I think it's
Fumblecast,
Fumblecast, at Fumblecast on Blue Sky. That's right. And you can follow the rest of us, I believe, from there because we're often retweeting ourselves. And our first few episodes are going to be coming out very soon. So look forward to that.
And I'm glad that you've got where you needed to get at in terms of what the correct opinion is for this week. That's going to be 1 of 200. Everybody, join your local Pinkertons. This has been Mike Hosking.
If artificers are, then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road to power now is paved with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when the criticism cost me ought to stay. Cause I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're on the road to hell.